when it comes to the delimitation of boundaries, especially the maritime boundary, we have seen the South China Sea, the Ukrainian and the Russian situation also, and the parties led the matter or brought the matter before the United Nations, that is Convention on the Law of the Sea. Now that the matter is before the ICJ, and given that the two countries have enjoyed significantly symbiotic sense of relationship in the fight against Al-Shabaab, how well does it awash the entire efforts by the Kenyan and the Somali governments in the fight against Al-Shabaab that started ever since the Operation Linda Inchi in 2011?
You know, these things have a very powerful national strategic considerations that are very historical. Somali state collapsed. We had no role in the collapse of the Somali state. But when there was that disintegration of state and society, the Somalis came in as refugees to many countries in the world. They came in here, and we welcomed them. And in the process, at the time the Somali state itself was collapsing, we had powerful sanctions from the IMF and the World Bank itself. We did not have the foreign reserves or foreign exchange that we needed ourselves. If you remember very well, those days with the Moi government, it was a serious problem because of the human rights violations, democratization. We had Ambassador Smith Hempston in here. I can tell you for free, and it's good to be honest about these things. When you go into that mode in which you lose your senses because of certain patriotism and lose sight of the truth itself and the reality, you will make mistakes and you will lose in the end. Sure. We gained seriously from the presence of Somali refugees in here. They never contributed in any way to any burden on our own social security here. We did not have to pay for them anything. On the contrary, the international community came in here and poured money into the refugee camps. You don't find Somalis applying for jobs in our areas here and looking for employment. As a matter of fact, then there was this very powerful entrepreneur class who were way ahead of us, who came in and also got engaged in that business in here in partnership with Kenyans. It is through that we've been able to indigenize our economy to a large extent. If you remember Biashara Street, and all the importations in the country used to be done by Asians and other people before. Today, we are pretty much, the economy has changed. If you look at those demographics from those days and you look at it today, there's a massive, increase. They went and settled out in other countries in Europe and America and the rest of it. And being what they are, the Somalis they are, they wanted to bring up their children also in an environment in which they feel their faith and their culture and other things are basically protected. So 100,000 Somali families are now living in here, spending on average anything between $4,500 and $7,000 per month.
That's about 700,000.
That is per month. That's about between 450,000 to 700,000 per family, because they take their kids to the best schools. They employ people, even though you have people working for them. There are others who are doing business in here and literally opening up Kenya to the international markets. And these are the people, basically, in my opinion, who have helped a lot in supporting us in our own economy. These are the realities of the matter. Now, they have been so good, because you look at Kenyatta International Airport, Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, and you see the manner in which our own immigration officers used to deal with them, even those days, is not a very favorable thing. And at that same time, they're being told by the Tanzanians, come here, we'll give you a tax holiday in here. We will allow you to do in whatever you have to do. In Ethiopia, the same thing has been out there. Uganda, which is next door here, has been encouraging Somalia. You walk in as a Somali with a Somali passport in Uganda. It's one of the few countries in the world where you get an entry on the spot. Here we are gaining from it, having this substantial 3.53 million Somalis who are Kenyans, a whole region that's there. I mean, that symbiotic relationship, the fact that these two countries are sisters
Okay.
is one thing that has been lost on us. And then we behave with them this manner. The way they're behaving with them right now, there's something called international reciprocity. In the 60s, when we got independence, there were two Kenyans who were turned away from Heathrow Airport.
That's in the UK.
In the UK. Jomo Kenyatta called Mutua, who was at that time the immigration, I think, who was the director of immigration in the country at the time. I can't remember, he used to be called principal immigration officer those days. And he told him, listen, look for whatever reason you have to look for. Make sure you send back 2 British nationals today from our airport here. And they did that. So when you do something to a sovereign state, it doesn't matter whether it is weak like Somalia or any other state. They're bound to come out there. We have 50,000 Kenyans working in Somalia. We have an economy ourselves that has no natural resources. It is human resource that basically we're selling. The peace, the relative peace we have, the democracy we have, the environment we have. And that's why we're attracting the international community in the form of tourism and everything else and investments. We're selling our country.
Okay.
We're selling, you know, the beauty of our country, the education institutions that are in here, we are basically the medical facilities that are available in this country.
Okay.
Now, when you mess with that one, and the Ethiopians are telling them, they will relocate those things to Ethiopia, and you harass the business community from Somalia here, they will relocate to the neighboring countries. The net losers in this are ourselves.
Okay.
And I don't think we have a political class that is able to understand and comprehend that right now and do the right things when it comes to such things. There is this issue of the maritime. Maintain the shuttle diplomacy. Try and work out if you can get a dialogue or a settlement out of court.
Okay.
If they say categorically no, then wait until the court matter itself is determined.
Okay.
Yes.
At the center, Andrew Franklin, coming to you on this note, then, what we know is that all these issues unraveling and is centered, or the fulcrum point is perhaps about power status at the international level and also at the regional level here in the Horn of Africa region. Can we see a point with which we'll see the softening of the diplomatic stance between the two nations and rather focus on the brotherly nature of relationship between Nairobi and Mogadishu?
Well, the immigration is a double-edged sword in every country. I think Farah Maalim has very, very well summarized the benefits of immigration here. And quite frankly, there really isn't a lot of downside at all since 1991, whether it's at Dadaab or elsewhere. And quite frankly, Dadaab has also graduated a congresswoman in the United States from Minnesota. So I have publicly stated I'm in favor of immigration to the United States as a Marine Corps officer. I had Marines who were not citizens I commanded, and my grandparents emigrated from Eastern Europe to the United States. So immigration has a huge number of pluses. And in the case of the Somali diaspora to Kenya, it doesn't have a lot of downside, quite frankly. It is not a driver of terrorism at all. So and in fact, the notion of our political class here being unable to see that, I think, needs to be spoken about. Because there is no reason to bait the federal government of Somalia in Mogadishu. There's no reason to bait them, to humiliate them, to deny visas to officials traveling on diplomatic passports issued by the FGS. The front page of the Nation, sulking Somalia, sulking.
Yeah.
You know, what I understood about the initial comments by President Farmajo was you UN agencies and everybody else, you need to come here to Mogadishu. If you're having conferences about us, come here. Okay. Relocate here. Now that, I mean, on the face of it, it seems logical. However, reality is that Al-Shabaab is making it very difficult to operate in Mogadishu. And no matter how you put it, whether it's U.S. drone strikes, which are now being said, oh, it's disrupting their operations in rural areas. So now they're moving back into Mogadishu from where they withdrew in 2011. Okay. But the fact is that this seems to me is to be escalating beyond any sense of any level of common sense. I think it needs to be pointed out that the Kenya Defense White Paper issued in May, beginning of May 2017, does show the maritime border between Kenya and Somalia in accordance with the Kenyan position. That is, the line goes directly out.
That's a war.
Again, though, if you look at similar maritime disputes in West Africa, between Nigeria and Cameroon is one that they allowed to fester, so that because of what's happened in Cameroon in the Anglophone areas, they're not even able to exploit the oil area, the oil's resources on the Basaso Peninsula.
Okay.
But Nigeria has also signed another agreement with Sao Tome and Principe to exploit their maritime zone, joint exploration, joint exploitation. You see, Kenya has the financial muscle and the links to actually finance and properly administer a joint economic zone, a condominium over that disputed area. Right now, and even no matter who wins or who loses, if you will, there's not going to be any immediate exploitation. Kenya has recently set up a Coast Guard for reasons that seem less than obvious, when it has a Navy that's underutilized. But the fact is that Coast Guard is not going to be able to exert control. And even when the maritime border, if the International Court weighs in and comes down in favor of Kenya, that means the line goes straight out to the Indian Ocean. There is no FGS Coast Guard. And that's been a problem a vacuum for the last 6 years.
Okay. And having mentioned that, I'll come to Dr. Juma before we go on break, come back and talk about the issues that regard internal security. It's about, when we talk about territorial dispute, Dr. Ali, we are talking about a variety of relatively complex issues that regard the situation at hand at the moment, and one that perhaps concerns a lot of issues or maybe features the importance of the islands, say for instance in the South China Sea, the limitation of the boundaries and the sovereignty, which is now here the main base of the subject to discussion here on the program and also between the two neighboring nations. However, can there be an approach perhaps beyond what we see now, the sort of tit for tat, an eye for an eye, again between the two foreign affairs ministries based in Nairobi and Mogadishu, the two governments of President Mohamed Abdullahi and President Uhuru Kenyatta, on the need of economic, social and the political cooperation, that if a stable Somalia gains stability, it's good for Kenya. And if Kenya, of course, continues to be the dominant player in the region, then Somalia gains a lot in terms of building up the institutions that collapsed after the 1991 fall of the regime under Siad Barre, and also help the government in terms of its base cooperation and incorporation of the Somali citizens, including the tracking back the diaspora community in terms of building, taking part in the nation-building process.
Yes, actually, understanding of life sometimes requires that we revisit the foundations or the genesis of the issues, the symptoms and signs we are dealing with today. Yeah, why was what led to the fall of Siad Barre? Who had the interest in that region, and who has been benefiting in the collapse and in the failed state of Somalia for all these decades? If we know who that is, because you're talking about sovereignty, how sovereign can communities which were independent and were forced to actually be confined in specific UN resolved geographical location out of their consent. You lock your own brothers in the other country. Actually, there are cases where the boundary cut between inside your house. You're seeing the cases in Tanzania and Kenya. You see even Uganda. You know, the Awaris, the others are the other side, the others this side. They can either be a minister the other side, they can be a minister this other side. What sovereignty would you be proud of out of all this? You know, sometimes you can be given symptoms and signs to be rhetorical about, whereas the root cause and the genesis of our problem began right then.